Hello, welcome everyone to the Am IMA podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Andrew Fuller. I'm the host here at in the IMA. I am also the web development and social media lead for the IMA theme. I'm very kindly joined today by Dr. Amy Reeve, who is a researcher over in the Wellcome Centre for Mitochondrial Research. She's also the FMS Director of EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, Amy. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. It's nice to be here virtually.
Thank you. Yeah, it is virtually. I can see you're tucked away in the office. Those windows look very familiar. They're very similar to my office windows. How is life on campus these days?
Yeah, it's good actually. I'm maybe in the minority, but I actually quite like it at the moment. It gives you a little bit more time to do your work without a constant stream of people knocking on your door.
It's true. That is a benefit. The benefit of having fewer people in the office is there's fewer people to disturb you, I guess, as well. That's really whereabouts are you based? Which building are you based in? Sorry.
So I'm in the Cookson building, on the 4th floor.
I'm right at the top. Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So I just wanted to start a conversation. I just wanted to go like a little bit back in time, just to get a little bit of an understanding about how you ended up where you are, and like kind of what interests led you to doing what you're doing now. So I mean, you're not too dissimilar to myself, but you started out with a biology undergraduate degree. Whereabouts was it about? No, it was neuroscience. I get very confused with all the people I'm interviewing. Tell me what you did at undergraduate and where you did it. That's an easier thing to do.
Yeah, so I did neuroscience undergraduate at Edinburgh University.
Okay.
Which was really fantastic. They have a really strong history of good neuroscience research in Edinburgh. And it was a slightly longer degree, so it was 4 years.
Okay. The 4th year was a year out in the middle. Was it straight to masters or what?
So it was an honours year, but I think they also increased the length of the degrees slightly so that they can encompass people who've done A levels and people who have done Scottish Highers.
Yeah.
Just to ensure that there's equality in kind of the level that people are at.
Right.
I don't know if it's still the case, but it was when I went to university.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I know the Scottish universities, you can go there a year younger if you go straight from doing your hires, or if you switch to doing your advanced hires. But I only know that because my wife is Scottish and I know a lot of people who currently live up there. So that was the case many years ago. I won't say how many years.
It was certainly interesting from kind of a social point of view, I guess, because obviously the people that were coming from doing their hires were not 18 yet.
Yeah.
And then the rest of us that have gone up from our A levels didn't have to worry about
of age,
false IDs or anything like that.
No, that's true. Very true. Very true. That's awesome. So straight into neuroscience, but I mean, that's quite, well, to me, it seems quite specialized to kind of go straight into like a 4-year degree of a specialization of like a generic biology. Because from my perspective, I did straight biology and then specialized afterwards. So what made you want to jump straight into neuroscience? Was that something that you'd discovered even earlier than that? Were you a budding neuroscientist at a young age, or?
No. So when I originally went to Edinburgh, I was down to do zoology.
Right.
And that was because I'd always wanted to be a vet. And then unfortunately I didn't quite have, the academic, shall we say, qualifications to be able to go into veterinary science. So I signed up to do zoology.
Supposedly harder, right? It's supposedly harder than medicine to get into, right? I only know one vet, my entire school, science, academic, whatever you want to call it. I know one. I know a lot more doctors.
And X number of years ago that I went to university, there were 6 universities. Oh, can you hear the helicopter?
I can't. No, don't worry.
Okay. Great content.
I get that too. Sorry, no, I get that too. In fact, we'll throw it back to, I think it's episode 2 when I'm doing this interview from my office, and the helicopter lands even closer than it does outside York, because we're on the other side of the William Leach. So the helicopters make now 2 appearances. So shout out to the
that's nice. It's nice that it repeats itself.
Real world.
So I signed up to do zoology, and then in my 3rd year, I realised that I was much more interested in kind of the brain and its processing, and also the impact of things on that. So then in my third year, I switched to pharmacology.
Okay.
And then for my final honours year, I got into the neuroscience programme. And it was a very small cohort of students that went into that. So I was really pleased that I'd managed to get into that.
How many is small? Are we talking like a handful, like 10 or 20? Or
so I think there was 30 maybe.
Oh wow, really small.
It was a really small cohort, which was really nice, because we all got to know each other really well and things like that, and it meant that we could do some quite interesting practicals because we were such a small cohort.
Small group of you, yeah. That makes sense.
And then as part of that honours degree, that's when I kind of really cemented my interest in the brain, and looking particularly at the diseases that cause it to degenerate. And we had a really fantastic professor of anatomy, and he was kind of really old school, and he really went in depth with it. But that was it. I was hooked then.
It's funny how that can happen, isn't it? One you can get, I mean, it's a fairly well-trodden adage, but one good teacher can change what you're thinking about and change what you do for the rest of your life, right? So it's good to hear. I mean, that's interesting that you went, from the start of that conversation, when I thought you went straight into neurobiology, it was like a process of getting there, right, through starting, which is, I think, something that maybe people who are applying for university places aren't necessarily aware of. When I certainly wasn't anyway. Like, I thought that what you applied for on your UCAS form, that's what you did and you couldn't change. But maybe it's the Scottish system versus the English one, because I know my wife did exactly the same thing. She started with a degree, I think forensic science, ended up in chemistry, pure organic chemistry. And that's what she's doing now for a living. So it's similar stuff, right? You can mold it and change it to your interests. And sounds like that final honours year did you. Well, just look at you now. It did you a world of good, right?
And I think it really makes sure that you end up in something that you're really passionate about, because I think, having been in science for a few years now, there are terrible days where you just think, what am I doing? And if you don't have that passion, it's quite hard to kind of pick yourself up when you've been staring down 6 months of experiments that have failed, or
we've done.
Your paper's been rejected again, something.
For the third time with revisions or not, and I totally agree. You do have to. It is a career that demands passion in it. Otherwise, it's you can find affiliated things, but it's difficult to stick it out. That's true. That's very very true. So after that, then it was a straight shot from neurobiology. Once you graduated from neurobiology undergrad, was it definitely going to be a neurobiology PhD, and that was up here, right? Down here for you. Down here for you.
Yeah. So the day after my graduation, good timing, I came down for my interview at Newcastle to go straight into a PhD. So I went straight from undergraduate into PhD without doing a master's.
Okay. How was that? I mean, I guess you did 4 years, right? But you did 4-year bachelors. So that's the same. Again, I have a similar background to that. I've got a 4-year bachelor's with a year out in industry, but it's kind of hard to explain to people. It's like, well, the same length of time as a master's, but you don't have a master's. So why are you here at the same? How was it going straight out from one to the other?
It was fine. The neuroscience degree had like quite specialized kind of practicals along with it. So we did a lot of anatomy and dissection and sort of classic neurophysiology experiments, like stimulating nerves with drugs and making frog legs twitch and all that kind of stuff.
Wow, you had the real stereotypical biology experience. I mean,
like I say, it was X number of years ago. It's not like it was 2 years ago. But it was old school, like guinea pig intestines and stuff.
Excellent.
That we got to do pharmacology on. And then I remember I came down here and had my interview and got offered the PhD post, and my dissertation for my undergraduate degree had been library based.
Okay.
So there wasn't any kind of real practical experience that I had.
Okay, right.
So I walked into the lab on the first day and I met with Doug Turnbull, who is my my PhD supervisor, and he went, "Oh, you know, it's great that you're here, Amy. We're really excited to get started on the project. So we'll just get you going in the lab. We'll just get you to do something really simple. We'll just get you to do a PCR. You must have done loads of PCRs."
Brilliant.
And I went,
Yes. Actually,
no.
no.
And I could tell he sort of thought, right, great. Have we made a mistake here?
Yeah.
And then like the 3 years of my PhD were 80%, I would say, PCR. So
Well, there you go.
it
But you
turned
got
out okay.
pretty good at them now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big change. I mean, that's a massive jump from doing a dry project to doing a wet lab project is a massive jump. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely doable, but there's nothing like being thrown in the proverbial scientific deep end and just being told to figure out. So did you have a very helpful postdoc that deserves a shout out?
Yeah, my postdoc was Kim Krishnan, and she was absolutely fantastic. And she was not only very patient and supportive when I was trying to find my way in the lab, but she also kind of encouraged my development, I guess, as a researcher more broadly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I definitely wouldn't have got through my PhD without her, really.
Oh, good. I think behind unsung heroes behind a lot of PhD projects are excellent postdocs are a must, right?
Even but you recognize the importance of postdocs, I think, when you make that transition to start managing your own lab a little bit more.
Sure.
And you just, the amount of stuff that they take on, and you can say to them, look, could you just do this for me? Or, so we've got these students coming in tomorrow, we need to find a project for them. And they just go, right, okay. Yeah.
Here's three newbies, heroes. Figure it out. Yeah, no, they're definitely unsung heroes. So after that, so I guess that kind of transitions quite nicely into kind of where you are now. So how do we jump from PhD? Is there postdocs in there as well? Because you're still in the similar lab with Doug Turnbull and the same groups, and it's a very very successful community that you've got in like a massively important part of the medical school and research centres down there. So once you were inside those doors, it was decided you were staying there forever, or is it just quite happy to be there still?
I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that. So when I came to do my PhD was about trying to understand more about how mitochondrial dysfunction could contribute to Parkinson's disease. So obviously, the more I got into that, and the more time I spent with people who have Parkinson's, the more that kind of really concreted my interest in following that disease, I guess, through my career, and actually wanting to try and translate my very basic lab mechanistic science into something that was going to help people, because I think there's nothing more motivating than being in a room full of people with Parkinson's, for example, and hearing about what their priorities are. Because it's just astonishing. And I think people with Parkinson's disease are a very well-informed group of people, so they take the time to understand their disease and the research that's kind of around it. So when I finished my PhD, I knew that I wanted to carry on in that type of research, so looking at mitochondrial dysfunction in Parkinson's disease, and there was a chance for me to do a postdoc. But Doug was really good, because even though he kind of led our research group, he was really helpful at supporting people to kind of carve their own niche and develop something that really was their own. And then sort of life happens a bit, and like, you know, I met my husband, and then we had our family, our son. So then it didn't really make sense for me to move. And I didn't want to move away from the UK. And if I wanted to stay in the UK, if I wanted to do mitochondrial research, it made sense for me to stay here and then build networks with people who did Parkinson's disease and stuff around.
That makes sense. That definitely makes. It'll come into what we talk about later as well with regards to like managing a career like you have in science and research, and also managing a family life and kind of balancing that stuff, and not wanting to travel, or maybe wanting to stay local, or kind of putting down roots. And I think that's like, it's massively important. But it's also, I would wonder if you've got a thought on it, but what are your thoughts on that kind of understanding that if you want to do postdocs after you've done a PhD, that you should move labs? There's that. When I was doing my postgraduate work, that was very much the thought process, at least from my PI anyway, that if you're going to finish this and you're going to go on to do a postdoc after this, you have to be in a different lab, in a different city, in a different country, even better. You have to kind of spread your wings and get experience. But I never really understood why. Like, if the best people doing the best research for what you wanted were there, why not stay where you are and kind of, you've already got all the skills you need to succeed in the place you're at, and you know how to do it. Like, it was always seen as a bit of a negative thing. I don't know if that's still the case when you had that kind of feeling when you were at that point in your career, but how do you feel about it with that in mind, moving around?
Yeah, I think definitely for me, I definitely felt that pressure. And when I decided that I wanted to apply for a fellowship, I knew that I wanted to do the fellowship based in Newcastle, but then I sort of built in time away from Newcastle into that fellowship. And I'm not talking about kind of years, but I did try and spend a month or so in other labs just to give me that experience. But I really felt the pressure to really try and justify why I didn't want to move. And it was obviously life impacts that as well, but it really was, for me and my research, being in Newcastle really was the best place to do it, not just because of the mitochondrial group, but we've got a really good history of looking at diseases of later life and neurodegenerative disease. And we have that skill set and that knowledge here. So why would I want to try and forge those relationships with other people when we've got that here? We've got the brain bank, we've got all the facilities and things. So why would I then want to package that out and move otherwhere? But I don't think those pressures have gone. I think for the vast majority of people, they probably still feel that, especially when it comes to making those first steps towards independence and thinking about, well, what do I want that to look like? How am I going to move out of the shadow of my postdoc supervisor, my PhD supervisor, whatever it is. And I think that I was lucky, because I think people still say, well, why is Doug still on this paper? Or you've still got him on that paper, so you're not truly independent. But then I've kind of maintained that collaboration with him, and so I want to recognize that contribution. So why would I not put him on my papers? And
there's no point burning those bridges when it does nothing but benefit everybody else. I mean, having his input on those sorts of papers is invaluable, because he has got to the level he is at by being very good at what he does, and he's brought up a load of people, you included, with him, and there's no point not rewarding that kind of buoyancy to your career. So it's definitely worth thinking about it. It's something that's just on my mind a lot, because we see, like, doing what you do and what I do, I see a lot of PhD students come and you can get to know them over a few years, and then inevitably they don't hang around, or they're off after 3 years or 4 years or however long. Whereas sometimes, every so often, you'll get one that will maybe jump to a slightly different lab, a slightly different field, but same university, and they will stick around and they will invest or carry on investing the time in getting better. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it can be a really good thing. And equally, some people really like to move around and travel.
Yeah, definitely.
But very much so at the moment, with the world the way it is, that's even harder, right? Like, moving labs now, I can't imagine me finishing my PhD in the last 12 months. That would have been insane. It would have been so hard. But so I don't envy those people. But yeah, I always like to get people's impressions on that idea, because it's one of the ones that's just stuck in my brain over the years, and I just find it interesting.
Yeah, I think it is an important one. But I think you just have to think about what's best, really, both in terms of your science, but also life outside science. And I think in the past, people have assumed that science is your life, that's it. It's like, you know, that's it. If you're a scientist, that's what you do 24/7 for the 50 years or whatever that you work. But in reality, that's not particularly healthy for many people, I don't think.
Definitely not.
You know, there are people that make that work, but the vast majority of people want something more. And I think we need to recognize that life does go on outside science, and it's okay to say, oh, I'm going to take a holiday. And for people not to go, what? Are you crazy?
The phrase annual leave did not get mentioned once during my postgraduate studies. Not once. There was not. If you could find a couple of days to take off, more power to you. But when you came back, you had a shed load more work to get done. It was
and then even when you were off, people were still emailing you.
And you expect phoning you up and asking you where buffers are. I was like, well, it's labelled, find it. I
do have a slight confession. Do you know, like, I don't even get my emails to my phone, and I never check them at the weekend.
Good for you. That's fine. I think I was introduced to since the advent of Teams and lockdown and so on and so forth. That kind of had a massive impact on my mental health at the start. Somebody introduced me to the quiet hours function on Teams, and since then I put my quiet hours on, where you can basically tell Teams, okay, I don't work between X hour and Y hour and on these days, and it just won't send you any notifications on those days. And then when your hours start again, come Monday morning, for example, you can go back in and get your notifications, and then after 6 o'clock or whatever time you set it at, you don't get them again. And that has been, I know, right? I didn't know anything about it. I was responding to Teams.
Where was this a year ago?
I know. Especially with like smartwatches, like I think I can see, like you and I both have them, and it's like your wrist buzzes with every sort of random question that somebody has from a Teams channel that you're not necessarily, they don't need an answer from you right away. But yeah, it's definitely worth like for people's mental health. It's definitely, there are things you can put on, but you shouldn't have to actively, you shouldn't feel like you have to actively do that kind of thing. But I think some people feel a responsibility to respond as soon as they can. But I mean, quite nicely leads us on to the other aspect of your work, which I'm really interested in, which is the EDI work. So the like how did that come about? How did you branch into or like start getting involved with the equality, diversity and inclusion team? Because it is quite a big team at Newcastle, and it's obviously like a massive part of the university's like structure, right? I don't know how else to describe it. So how did you start getting involved in that?
So I guess to go way back again, so I've always really enjoyed like public engagement and things. I mentioned I like talking to people with Parkinson's, and I sort of through that, there were a couple of times when I wanted to organize events, and you have to really think about things like accessibility, or the length of time that somebody with Parkinson's will be able to concentrate and listen to what you're talking about, and the way that you might want to sort of modify that to make sure that you have a very like mutually beneficial interaction with that person. It's not just about us communicating our science, but it's giving people who want to hear about our science the opportunity to ask questions or feedback into it. And so I've always been really interested in that, and I get so much value out of doing that. And then as our Welcome Centre got bigger and Welcome released their report looking at research culture, I was involved in putting together a little team that wanted to look at research culture within just our centre. And about the environment that we have, and about how people's contributions are recognised, and about how they feel valued, but also how we support people within that, so that they feel like they feel part of something, and they feel like they've got a home here. And it just kind of progressed from there, really. I saw the advert come up for the directorship, and I went and had a chat with David Byrne about whether or not I could apply, because I kind of thought I was a little bit too junior, and whether or not it was something that I would bring value to if I was in that post. And it just kind of went from there, really. So they're trial running, having a co-directorship. So
Okay.
I share the role with Damien Parry, who's based in the School of, and I will get this wrong, and he'll probably shoot me. The biomedical sciences, biomedical, nutritional, and sports sciences. Got it.
Okay.
Nailed it. So he's very much kind of teaching based. He's got a very student facing role, whereas I'm institute research based.
Yeah.
So together we kind of have that overarching view, I guess, of what it's like to work within the university.
Yeah.
So we came into those posts February last year. Great timing.
Okay, so
again.
pretty recent. Yeah, that was a month before everything got very different, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So how's it been? How's the challenge been, like, added on top? I mean, I guess the benefit is you never got used to it being any different. So you had to start everything from scratch at distance anyway. How was that?
So it's okay. I mean, it works really well, I think, because we can share the load.
Mm-hmm.
So we're committed to doing that job just 2 days a week, but the nature of the role means that it often extends beyond that, you know, especially if there's like a global pandemic, for example. You know, that really needs a lot of work, and it needs a lot of understanding. The biggest challenge for me was trying to find my feet and get to grips with a role that is much bigger than being a researcher who's focused on their own research, their own team, getting the next paper out, getting the grant, thinking more strategically, and then suddenly finding myself on faculty executive board with you know, the heads of all the schools in the institutes, and finding my voice a little bit and having that confidence to say, hang on a minute, have you thought about this? Have you made sure you've factored in that? And a year on, I can say I enjoy it.
Okay.
6 months ago,
maybe not so much.
Okay. But like you say, you know, within FMS, we now have quite a big team. There's myself and Damien as directors, and an EDI advisor, Louise, who are kind of the central team. But then we've tried to make sure that every institute and every school have representation as well, so that we do make sure we capture information from everybody across all different roles. But then we have that duplicated then across all 3 faculties, and then there's like a central team as well.
And it when you start breaking it down like that, it does become very, very clear to me that, like, you guys are at the top of what becomes quite a rapidly expanding pyramid, right? And there's a lot of people underneath you doing a lot of really excellent work.
Yeah.
But maybe from my perspective, it's something that I am acutely aware of. Like, you can't walk very far in university without seeing a poster somewhere with the Athena SWAN logo on, for example. Or something about an engagement policy with people from ethnic minority backgrounds or BAME backgrounds. And I think, I don't know, from my perspective, it feels like, is there some barrier, or is there any barrier? Is it entirely in my brain between getting people interested in that? So all those people in that pyramid underneath you, are those all people that you had to go out and find and recruit in, or those are all people doing this sort of work already that we were able to just kind of bring together in like an EDI team and actually consolidate all their good work and then take it up to higher levels? Or was it a case of very much a top-down structure? We want it to be set out like this. Let's go and fill these positions with these people. How did that kind of come about? It's a bit of a weird question, but
so it was a little bit of both, I think. So before we had the restructure and our new institutes and themes, there was obviously a lot of this work kind of going on. We had, like, the various institutes, for example, had their own Athena SWAN awards, and then we got the faculty one, and then we had the restructure. And part of that restructure was trying to make sure that people felt that EDI was very much on the agenda, and that it was embedded within the faculty.
Okay.
So that everybody felt a little bit more invested in it and realized why it was important. And even if you felt that it didn't impact you at some point, it probably would. And I think, the switch to working from home has probably highlighted that a little bit more for people. But the people that are within the broader team across the faculty were either doing the work before,
Right.
and it's kind of always been part of their role. But we've had loads of people volunteer as well, and particularly within the research themes and the institutes, and all the schools and the institutes have their own committee now. I think most of the themes do as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of those are populated by people who have just volunteered, and they already have an interest in working in this space, or they're particularly passionate about one area of it or one protected characteristic. And it has been really nice, and you do get people that are really passionate about it.
Yeah.
But I think in an ideal world, you would want a faculty where there was no need for any of those roles.
This is always the thing, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of, whenever you're talking about equality in as a general thing, or diversity or inclusion, is that you want people to say, well, it shouldn't be a problem. So why do we need to have these kind of people in their roles when it should all be equal anyway, right? There shouldn't be a pay gap.
Yeah.
There should be a equal representation of all different races, colours and creeds, and anybody coming into university should have zero impact on whether those people are employed. But it does. And until that is taken away completely, people like yourself and everybody else who works so hard on it are needed, and that work is needed to be done. I guess my next question, would be like, in terms of like educating other people at university in the steps that are being taken and the training that maybe people need to have to change their behaviors, what kind of things are put in place at the moment to help people to keep in like an EDI issues in mind when they're, say, recruiting for a new PhD student or a postdoc? What kind of things are in place just now?
So we have quite a few training courses. So for example, we have online training courses for things like unconscious bias.
Yeah.
And certainly people are encouraged to undertake that before, for example, they sit on an interview panel, or when they're wanting to put together their panel to interview somebody. And there's certainly been a big drive to get people to increase diversity on those panels, not just in terms of gender, but across the board in terms of like level of experience or seniority or anything.
Yeah.
But within the kind of central EDI team, they've recruited this year an EDI trainer specifically.
Okay.
So she's looking at training for things like microaggressions and active bystanderism, and white privilege. So, a lot of the stuff that's come out of events last year in terms of, the Black Lives Matter movement, and things like that. But it is something that we want to build into training and make sure that people are aware just the breadth of training that's out there, so that it almost, I guess, becomes second nature. So you're not recruiting for a job and you think, right, I need to make sure I've got a woman on the panel, and I need to make sure you just do it naturally.
Absolutely.
And I think the one thing that I will say is that David Byrne is hugely supportive, and he's very conscious of the value of this work,
right,
and its importance, which I think makes a big difference. Because then if we go into EB and say, right, we want everybody on executive board to do white privilege training, and you just met with silence, it's really nice if there's a voice that goes, yeah, absolutely, this is a great idea, this is what we need to do. And it does make all the difference. But I guess the other thing is that we need to make sure that those kind of training packages are available to everybody, but they're tailored. For example, a professor who's been in the university for 25 years may need slightly different training, obviously, to an undergraduate or PhD student that's coming in and is obviously significantly younger and has very different life experiences. Just to make sure that it's a little bit more equitable, I would say.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it wasn't something necessarily that was offered to me when I started at the university X years ago. It probably would have been very beneficial to not just to myself, just so that you are aware of it throughout your training and throughout your career, but also to those who are hiring you, right? To those people who are sitting on the other side of that desk, and what kind of impact that can have on you when you're right at the start. I think it's amazing. That's really good to hear that we've got like a good kind of an increasing training package that can be offered. Like toolkits that you can give people the tools at which to be able to educate themselves a bit better.
I think that's the thing. I think if this year has taught me anything, it's the value of educating yourself. Because we had an open letter that came to the faculty which asked an awful lot of questions about racial inequality and racism within the faculty, and like I made sure that I educated myself about those issues, to make sure that when we did reply, that I'd taken the time to kind of think about those things, and I think that's all we can do,
for sure,
to just to make sure that we increase our awareness of the difficulties and the challenges and the barriers that other people face. We will never understand them, but we can educate ourselves about what they are.
And I think that's a really, really good point. And I think it takes a certain level of training and skill, and it's like I think you have to actually practice and get yourself better at, to when you see something or read something else or see a statistic that either you disagree with or it doesn't make sense to you, to not immediately go on the defensive and they think it's wrong, because it may well not be wrong, and it may be that you're wrong, or that you have misunderstood it, or you've not understood the context in which it's been presented. To take a step back and to, like you're saying, to educate yourself as to where and why this is coming and the issues it's trying to cover, and then try and apply that education to your impact on the thing that you've just read. It's not easy to do. I don't think it's like everybody's initial instincts are to be very defensive, at least from my perspective they are. Everybody thinks, well, this tells me I'm being biased. I'm not biased. I'm going to ignore it. It must be wrong. But actually, there's a lot of training and learning and educating you can do.
I think
to show you that.
I think it does take a little bit, I think, to hold your hands up and say, I need to teach myself more about this. I need to read more books, or listen to the voices of the people that have been affected by this. I can't think of how to phrase it. Like not to make myself better, but to give me that awareness.
That's it. That's a nice way of putting it.
I can have those conversations, and like you say, not automatically be like, whoa, hang on a minute.
Exactly.
You have
to learn those conversations, right? You have to learn how to have them. It's not straightforward, and especially with the amount of different people that we've got and the size of the university, you could very rapidly deal with a lot of different types of people and people from different areas of life, and you might never have met someone like that before, which should be great. That should be a really fascinating thing, but sometimes it takes a little bit of training to know how to process that kind of information when it comes in. So on that note, with regards to like the themes, I don't know how much what themes you're a member of personally, but within the IMA theme, we have our EDI members that sit on the steering committee, and they do an excellent job of trying to involve the steering committee and the members of the theme in EDI activities and education and data gathering and so on and so forth. But how can any regular person on the themes get more involved with the kind of stuff that you do?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Cue the plug.
Absolutely, plug away, please.
So when we were talking earlier, obviously you mentioned Athena SWAN.
Yeah.
And it's something that I guess has been widely advertised across the faculty for quite a number of years now.
Yep.
And it's obviously important that we continue to work towards fulfilling that and getting the award renewed and things like that. But what we've been trying to do is to kind of broaden out our work so that we can look a little bit more intersectionally and start to look at other protected characteristics aside from gender. So how we can better integrate our race equality work charter, or how we can better work with Stonewall and things like that, to make sure that we do look at all protected characteristics and make sure that everybody does feel that sense of belonging. So a couple of weeks ago we launched our equality project, and this is a project which is at the moment very much underpinned by fulfilling Athena SWAN, but it is much bigger than that, and we hope that it will continue and evolve over the years. But we are asking for volunteers to take part in it. And we're looking for people to commit a little bit of time to either sit on a work stream or just work with us to make sure that we fulfill that. But it's really important that we get people of all contract types, of all lengths of service, of all roles. Just we need that diversity of voice to make sure that we have representation of everybody within the faculty. So if anybody wants to volunteer, that would be amazing.
How can they volunteer? Where can they?
So they can email Louise Wright, who is our EDI advisor, and she will be able to give you all the information.
That's great, and I'll get some links from you and post them up on our social media pages and our websites and so on. And we'll try and steer as many people as we can towards that, because it's it's I know we've spoken about like educating ourselves and the things that people can do to involve themselves in this sort of work, but this is quite literally the easiest entry point into feeding back into the large university structure. So I think it's really important that people do it.
Yeah, and I would just say that if you're listening to this and you feel like you're a little bit marginalized, or that your voice hasn't necessarily been listened to in the past, I would definitely volunteer and be that voice and represent people who may be in the same situation to you, who may also be feeling the same. Because I think when Damien and I came into these roles, if it had been under normal circumstances, people would have been sick of us, because we would have rocked up to every meeting and we would have met people, and we haven't really been able to do that. But it's quite hard to do our job if people don't come and talk to us and they don't tell us things.
Yeah.
And the open letter was a real challenge, but it was a good challenge because it forced us to look at things and reflect on what we're doing within the faculty. And I think, without kind of those challenges and those conversations, we may not necessarily be able to capture all the voices.
Absolutely.
Which is ultimately what these roles are about. Yeah,
absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. It's a real, especially with the working at home, and there are some people who are going to be, they might not set foot back in their office for who knows how long, another 12 months, maybe, never. And it's still super important for those voices to be heard. Like, your life is now very different, but your job is still your job. You're still working in the large university structure. And if you feel like it's changed too much in the last 12 months, things are different now, this is the way to kind of get that voice out there. So I think, you're absolutely right. It should definitely get as many people as we can talking to it. I'm conscious I'm taking up loads of your very valuable time. I really, really appreciate you joining me. Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap up? I think we've probably hit most of the key points we wanted to talk about.
I don't think I can do any more plugging, but if anybody wants any information, we've also just recently released our EDI strategy for the faculty. So I can send you a link for that as well, if people would like to get a bit more of a sense for kind of what Damien and I are about a little bit, because we wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of our personality in there as well.
Absolutely. And hopefully the people who are listening to this can understand you a little bit better, hearing a bit of your background, and you're a very, very easy person to talk to, the easiest podcast ever.
You.
So
thanks so much.
We definitely encourage people to get in touch and get involved. But thank you so much for for joining me. It's been really nice to talk to you, and hopefully we'll put all those links and all the information for the things we've spoken about in this episode, in the episode descriptions, and as links on the podcast descriptions as well. But yeah, until we run into each other on the corridor again, it's really, really nice to talk to you. Take care.
Yeah, you too. But it's been a total pleasure.
Thanks very much, Amy.
Bye.
Bye now.